So, Catherine, can you tell us what is Iyengar Yoga?
Yes, but it isn't an easy question to answer. Um, to my mind, Iyengar Yoga, at the heart of yoga, any kind of yoga, is the idea of union. And by that, I think people don't necessarily understand what that means, but I mean, it's a lot to do with integrating. And what I think Iyengar Yoga does is it is a process for enabling that integration. And that process starts with, it starts through asana, because and the physical aspects of asana, because that's the most, I think, accessible route into yoga for most people. But I think what Mr. Iyengar really appreciated is that the yoga postures are archetypal. They are iconic shapes that have specific physiological impacts. So that's why we have the principles like alignment, extension, and all of this, because that's the starting point. You have to have that in order to go deeper into the postures. I think, which is a real positive. There's a downside to it, which is that sometimes Iyengar teaching can be very much just about those details, the details of the physical aspects of the postures, which isn't what Guruji intended. So.
Great. We use a lot of props and actually use shorts to practice in Iyengar Yoga. Why is that?
I'll start with the props question, and that is because, and it's very interesting to note, Guruji did not use any props. If he used props, he very rarely would use something that was actually a facilitator. He used weights, heavy weights, to be able to get that surrender aspect of postures. But he didn't need a brick to do Setubandha. Or whatever. He worked with his own capabilities, but he could see when he started teaching that some of the postures, the shapes, were not accessible to people because of restrictions they had, which could be stiffness or injury or any sorts of things like that. So the props came in order to make the yoga, the asana practice, accessible to a much broader group of people. And it's a really interesting point, and it's one of the reasons it's fantastic to be at the Institute in Pune, which is that you see lots of wooden props in all sorts of one-off odd shapes and sizes. And the reason for that is because he looked at this man and had a prop designed to help that man with that posture. So you have a whole eclectic range. And, that also comes to, I think, another point about Iyengar Yoga, which is that, and I remember when I was first training as a teacher, I couldn't understand why there wasn't kind of a rule book, a guidebook about how to teach and what you should be teaching about each posture. And of course, there are basic principles in every posture that will help you get the alignment, the balance, the stability, the mobility, the extension, but it's not a formula. And you have to see, what's the weather like, what time of day are you practicing, who are the people in the class, if you're talking about doing this as a teacher. And, working with things as and when is required. I think, however, there's become, particularly in the West, a bit of a dependency on props, which is interesting. And I mean, when people come into my class, they know they're not allowed to go and get the set of 4 blocks and 2 bricks and a blanket and a belt and what have you, because I like to have a clean space so that you have a kind of open mind. I think that if you have a specific territory and specific equipment, in a way, that's very much a safety net. It doesn't challenge you. It makes you secure. And a big part of your yoga experience needs to be about getting out of your comfort zone and allowing yourself to be challenged. Now, about the shorts, well, and I'll say one more thing about the props, that again, it's important that you don't get dependent on a prop. And although a prop may be really helpful to you at a certain point when you're learning a posture, you also need to try using the prop in different ways to be exploratory, and not using a prop at all, or using a different kind of a prop and seeing how that helps you and what the impacts of that are. I think that a real challenge for students is that they don't just do something mechanically, but they look at the cause and effect. So if they do something, they look to see, well, what impact does that have? How has that changed it for me? What has it enabled? What else has it changed? So yes, that's very important. So a lot of people are very uncomfortable wearing shorts. They're uncomfortable exposing their bodies. But to me, it's absolutely essential. And as I was saying, it's because we're not comfortable. We look at ourselves. You may look at yourself in the mirror, but that's not the same thing as looking at yourself and studying your body, and particularly looking at the asymmetries in your body. And until you look at something with the right kind of vision, you don't actually see what your body's doing. And to my mind, unless you're wearing shorts, you're concealing what happens, what your legs are doing. You know, if you have leggings on that are covering your knees, you can't see the detail of what's actually happening in your knees. You know, and I think we assume that our two arms are identical, our two legs are identical, that, you know, that's what we are. But if you sit on the floor in Dandasana and actually look at your legs, you will realize how much asymmetry there is. Each one is completely different. That's like one is black and one is white. If you actually stop and start and look. And if you're not wearing shorts, you can't see that. You may think you can see it, but you can't. You absolutely can't.
Good. Yes. Catherine, can you tell us about your personal practice and how long do you do yoga? Tell us about how yoga became
How I
part
came
of,
to yoga.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't even remember how long ago it was. It must have been around 30 years ago or something. A friend of mine at work she said she was going to this yoga class in the evening. Did I want to come? And I thought, I don't mind, I'll try something, why not? So we went to this yoga class, and when we got there, it was in a church hall. It was an extra space at the church, and there was a sign on the door saying that the class was cancelled, and this is because the yoga teacher broke her hip. And so I'm thinking, so she broke her hip doing yoga? Is yoga dangerous? You know, what happened? What's going on? And then I didn't think about it again. And maybe 6 months later, or it was probably even a year later, we tried to go again, and the class was on. And the woman who was teaching the class was absolutely fantastic. And she had broken her pelvis in 5 places, and she had broken ribs and her shoulder and many other things because she had to drop herself off the edge of a cliff because she was hiking and this happened. So it had nothing to do with yoga, but yoga did have to do with her recovery, her rehabilitation, and she's 86 now and still teaching at least 2 classes a week in London, which is just remarkable. So she's a fantastic inspiration. So I started going to classes with her, and I found that what I liked about it at the time was I had a very busy job, very involved with the job. You know, it makes your head spin with all the things you're thinking about. And when I would go to a yoga class, you had that hour and a half where the rest of the world wasn't there. You're in the room, you're on your mat, you're with the teacher, you're not even thinking about the other students in the class. You're just there and you're doing the posture and really focusing. So that really intense focus, to my mind, was a really helpful thing, in life. And I liked the challenge I liked standing postures. I think I liked back bends then, and I liked inversions. I didn't like forward bends. Those were always difficult for me. And then I started going to another teacher, and she taught differently, so it was interesting. Both were Iyengar teachers, but each teacher has their own unique style, and I got different things from each teacher, so that was really, really fantastic. And I think I was ending up going to a couple of classes a week at that time, but not really doing any of my own practice. It took me a long time to come to my own practice. And I don't even remember why and how I decided to train to be a teacher. It was like it just kind of evolved. And all of a sudden I found myself that there was teacher training not far from me, and I was going to the teacher training and this kind of thing. And the teacher training is a fantastic thing, because even if you don't want to be a teacher, it's a really good way of improving your understanding of the postures, of stretching yourself, getting yourself out of your comfort zone, and trying some new things, and understanding more just generally about Iyengar Yoga. So all of those things are real positives. And I had my first assessment, which I failed, and this was just devastating. But as with all these things, you always learn from failures. So I decided a year later to try again, and it's a very grueling, very demanding, very intimidating process at the moment, or up to now. It is going to change. And then I passed the second time, so I'm with that thing.
Okay, go.
So I decided to go for my junior intermediate. All the levels are changing now, but this is the next level after introductory, about 12 or 13 years ago. And so I trained for several years with somebody that was teaching one of those courses, and then I went for my assessment. I failed. And of course this was devastating, and particularly because my job was so busy and demanding, and I just thought, I've made all the time to practice, now what am I going to do? So what I did was I continued training and continued practicing, and I took the assessment a year later, and I failed. So I failed the junior intermediate twice. And then I thought, well, actually, maybe this isn't the right time for me to be doing that. So I didn't go for it again until last year, which is a long time since it was probably a 14-year journey. But I was ready last time, because my understanding of the postures is so different than it was before. And one of the things that really helped that was coming to Pune for the first time 3 years ago, and being with the community of teachers who at the center of their practice is this kind of creative approach, exploratory, creative. Also, there's a group of people help each other, people make suggestions, not critiquing the postures, but you see somebody doing something and it inspires you, so you think, oh, I'll try that, and then you find that gives you a breakthrough. So I think I realized that, and it's probably human nature, we want to practice the things that come easily, the things we like the most. And in fact, of course, what you need to practice are the things that come the least easily, and the things you think you don't like, because those are the ones that will give you the breakthroughs. And once I got my introductory level 1 and 2 certificates, I started teaching. I very quickly seemed to start teaching, and I think back at the time how I was working in a really demanding job, and then I had 2 children, and then I was teaching all these yoga classes. Life was really just insane. And it meant that, you know, you can never spend enough time doing any of those things. You know, everything is a little bit, there's an inadequacy somehow. So I think I'm going to fast forward some years, and what happened for me is that I actually lost my job 5 years ago, and this was devastating, and I was nearly 50, or I was 50, and you're just thinking, what do you do next, and how am I going to replace this income? And what it enabled me to do was actually really come into my yoga, which has been fantastic. So I was able to then start to develop my own practice properly, and to be able to discover some different teachers and get to work with some. I'm very lucky because in London we have a lot of senior teachers. So I have a nice choice of people that I can go to. And I then got more involved in the whole yoga community. And I'm talking about peer group, you know, other teachers and this kind of thing, because another thing that's very good once you're a teacher is to actually do peer practice, to practice with other people, which can be a really good experience. But for me, you know, it's given that I have been doing yoga for a long time, you know, probably 30 years, the fact that I've learned more in the last 5 years than in the previous 25. And I could probably say I've learned more in the last, you know, year and a half than I have in all that time that came before. And almost every day, maybe every day, I'm learning something new. And I'll have a moment where you're thinking, and then as soon as you have one of those moments, all these things start to click into place, which could be something to do with, I mean, for me, my hips, outer hips, have always been a problem. They've restricted me in all sorts of ways. And even just this trip to Pune has really helped me get a focus on what I need to do to overcome that problem. I mean, teaching about the outer hips is really central to how I teach, because I know it's a problem for everyone. But now I also really feel it, and I'm making, I think, pretty fast progress because of that. And there are so many things like this, you know, every week, every time I go to a workshop, every time I go to a class, something goes in, you know, I absorb something that is really a fundamental change.
Can we share the lessons you have learned in these years of practice, personal practicing?
Well, this will sound a little bit like a cliche, but I think, you know, you've heard the expression that you have nothing to fear but fear itself. And to me, this is very true about yoga, that you have to have courage. You know, you have to be willing to rise to the challenge, to do the things that you avoid, to take yourself very much out of your comfort zone, and to also trust in yourself. Because if you think about it, you have the fundamentals. You know, anybody who's practiced yoga for some years has the fundamentals already in them, in their body. You just need to trust that, and then you can start the real journey.
Catherine, do you have any goals with your practice? Can you tell us if they are professional or personal or physical or spiritual?
I think I have an implicit goal, which is about, I want to be a teacher that inspires students to push themselves, you know, to keep evolving and to not be static. So that's one thing. I think in my own practice, I want to do the same, to take the inspiration that I continue to have and that I've already had, and to push myself in right directions. And I think it's one of the really exciting things, and it's part of how the whole Iyengar process has worked, is that there are relationships between all of the postures. And if you look at the book of In Light on Yoga, it's 360 postures or something like this, and you look at so many of them and you think, oh, I'll never get there. And therefore you never start. You never try to go anywhere towards those. But the more you understand that actually that posture is just about working that hip in the same way you have to in the posture you already know really well. And then you can apply it in 6 other postures, that same action. And then you realize that in fact, that thing that looked so unattainable, so far away, is actually quite possible. You know, you won't look like Mr. Iyengar. You're not going to look like perfection, but that's not what it's about. It's about trying and continuing to develop and just, taking risks. That's what's at the heart of it.
Do you have a message for any people, like people who don't know yoga, people who practice yoga, people who want to be a teacher?
Well, I think the biggest lesson for me, and it does relate to the goals as well, is that you have to do your own practice. You absolutely have to do your own practice. And you don't need to be scared by that, and it doesn't mean that you have to commit an hour and a half a day to practice, but you need to get on the mat every day. And that will be the start of the journey. That's the most important thing.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Namaste.
Namaste.